Well, yeah, thank you all. First of all, hi everyone. Just thanks for joining today's FairPlanet Points of Return Roundtable. We've also got the founders of A La Luz joining us, Gonzaga and David from New York and Venice, respectively. And they've been so great in helping organize this event and coordinating with all of you. And I'm just really happy that we can all speak from different places in the world today. I'll start off by introducing myself. I'm Evalie Klinkenberg. I'm a writer for FairPlanet, a nonprofit journalistic platform that supports movements for social and environmental justice. And I'm speaking to you today from near San Francisco, California. So yeah, it's lovely and extremely hot here. So yes, maybe next we'll hear from Gonzaga and David, and then turn it over to the artists to briefly introduce yourselves and a little bit about your work that you've contributed to.
Hi, well, I'm Gonzaga. I'm from Bilbao, Spain, but I'm based in New York. And I started A La Luz with David back in 2015. So it's been a long and crazy ride, actually. And yeah, we're delighted with the reception that Points of Return has had, and like with the quality of works that you guys participated with. So yeah, I'm excited about this conversation. David, do you want to add anything?
No, I mean, I've actually handed over organizing most of this to Gonzaga, but we've been both completely overwhelmed with the work that you guys have produced for the exhibition. And I'm actually here in Venice at the Biennale, and I've had people come into the show that have followed A La Luz on Instagram, for example, and they've said how powerful that exhibition has been for them. A couple of artists from Germany were in yesterday, and one of them had applied for the show. So it's had a really wide reach, so we're absolutely delighted about that. But yeah, I'm an artist too, like Gonzaga, and we've collaborated over the last few years and done some really interesting projects, but this has been a pinnacle so far, and we're just absolutely delighted that it's gone so well. So I'll hand you back to Gonzaga.
Well, Abby, who I think I don't have anything else to say for now, but.
Well, yeah, thanks for providing a little bit of background and context for us, just thinking about the project in a wider sense. And now I'd love to open it up to the artists, like sort of what inspired you to submit your work, and what's been your experience with the Points of Return project?
Before anything, it's a big pleasure to participate on Point of Return, and thank you very much for the FairPlanet to organize this event for us. And my name is Felipe Franco, and I'm a Brazilian artist, born and raised, and I live in Helsinki, in Finland, since 2013. And it's from here where I work and I develop my investigations. And I come from a southeastern region of Brazil, where mining activities is very much the main economic power, and also the main agent of accelerated alteration and destruction of the landscape. So from the very beginning, my work addresses this kind of what I like to believe is a genuine concern with this social environmental crisis and its many aspects, lately guided through the lens of environmental aesthetics. So I incorporate materials in my work that I transfigure through combinations of different techniques, and I explore the boundaries between different mediums with my processes. Following the question, what inspired me to submit the work? Beside a very close friend that suggested me to look for the open call. I think the global scenario, the current global going through now, shaken by this combination of social environmental crisis and still ongoing pandemics, besides the latest geopolitical tensions that are bringing back the threat of a war within European territory and the nuclear threat to the world. it felt for me more than ever imperative to rethink the possible and possibly restructure somehow my approaches, including the new possibilities of promoting and exhibiting. So I thought it was the moment to try to, even though it was never my main intention, but it felt like it was the time to start to promote and to collaborate virtually in different platforms, and that's maybe what moved me towards points of return, and mostly because the open call was so very much warming for the kind of work that I developed.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing a little bit about that. Maybe we'll turn it over to Tanja next.
Hi, thanks so much for having us, and yeah, thank you so much to A La Luz. It's been a really beautiful experience to show my work with you all. I am based in Berkeley, California, where it's also quite hot, and I'm originally from Hong Kong, which is where I grew up and my family still lives. I'm a visual artist. I work primarily with human disturbed spaces, and I think about them as zones for potentially like shifting our ecological perception, primarily through trying to create a sense of strangeness and intimacy between the audience and the subject that I'm focusing on. I work in all kinds of mediums. The project that I have up with A La Luz is pretty traditional for me. It's just charcoal drawings. I do a lot of installations with found objects, and work with a lot of materials that I gather from spaces as well as some video work. I think I was really drawn to the way that the project was described. I think it was a fairly sophisticated and subtle understanding of these issues, which I don't often see. Of course, there was also the pandemic, so that made showing online very appealing. And I also like the idea that it wasn't, that it had a bit of a global reach, that it was calling out to folks from across the globe. And that seemed like a really wonderful opportunity, especially since things can feel a little siloed in the Bay Area. Yeah, and I'm really humbled and happy to be showing with all of you. I really love all the work.
Thank you, Tanja. Maybe next we'll hear from Miguel. Oh, mute. There
yeah, I'm unmuted now. Okay, well, good night, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all to share some of our ideas and our processes. And to be honest, I don't really remember how I arrived to the, like, how I came across the open call of A La Luz. But it's like at the epicenter of my practice of what I've been doing over the last 10 years. So at some point, I just learned about it, and I thought, okay, this is interesting, no? And I thought it would be interesting to contribute, especially to this program that was thought of as an international hub for talking about climate change and the human interaction with planetary processes. I am from Spain. I'm also a visual artist and an independent researcher, and I'm working primarily between installation, situated performance, and then I document also my performances with video and photography. So I work across many different mediums, but mostly around concerns of cultural ecology, geologic phenomena, and climate breakdown. And I work from these well, my practice is very conceptually and research-based, field, no? And so I work from the natural sciences, from environmental activism point of views, post-humanism philosophy, post-colonial theory, are all things that are like informing my practice in my investigation. And yeah, the project that I presented to this program was an intervention I did in I think it was 2018 in Iceland, in which I placed these sheets of paper that were previously colored with a non-toxic water-based ink, and I located them underneath melting areas of the glacier, so that the glacier was treating these images made by the agency of the ice. And being a process-based work, it kind of also contained the history of the glacier in itself through the making process of the work. So I was very interested in this idea of letting the glacier speak, right? Giving voice to all these like non-human agency that is around us, because we kind of like humanize things, and we tend to look at things from anthropocentric perspectives. So for me, it was also interesting to just settle the process, but let it work on its own. Yeah, and I'm also super excited to be showing my work next to yours. I think the program was super nice and compelling, and some of the works were like visually very powerful and conceptually very interesting. I think I don't know if I left something behind, but please do ask if not.
No, you did great. That was great.
Okay.
Yeah. No, thank you all for taking the time to also introduce yourselves and your work. So maybe next we'll hear from Ulrika.
Hi, yes, my name is Ulrika. I live in Stockholm. Right now I'm in the countryside, so I'm using my phone, and it's very dark here. Actually, so I'm in a little hut. But I work mainly with the sort of contemporary belief, I would say. So how you create reality, and so my starting point in this ear to the ground has been to sort of give voice to land. So I've been working with field recordings, and I was in Death Valley in 2017, and that's the project I'm presenting in the Points of Return. And I think I just came across this by chance. I mean, there was something that I read through, and I thought, this is what I mean, when I saw the open call, it was just like, this is where this project should go. So it was something. So that's how it happened. But I work with photography, installation, field recordings, performance, any medium. And but this ear to the ground project is something I've been working on for 6-7 years, and it started with that I came in contact with another artist who worked with field recordings, and that's something that really intrigued me. So it led on to different sounds that I found in my discovering research in different places. But I have also been I was invited to a land art project some years ago in South Africa, and this is the way when I thought about what do we take with us from our experience in nature, and that land art is very traditional in a sense, and I wanted to sort of talk about land art in a new way, because we have I don't know if it's really a relevant question here, but I mean, land art has I think land art is what we are all doing here at this moment. So that's something I've been discussing and thinking about a lot as well. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, thank you. Adam, would you like to share a bit next?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning from Australia in the future. I'm in the outback at the moment, and it's bloody cold. I'm interested in ways that video art can approach the whole spatio-temporal complexities of this vast problem, this hyper-object of climate change. And I work with non-human perspectives via drones, which can kind of give this this kind of perspective that early Renaissance painters used, sort of not human perspective, not a divine perspective, but somewhere in the middle. That draws us in. And I use drones, heat cameras, when I can get my hands on them. They're very difficult technology to work with. Reverse motion, slow motion, time lapse, and all these elements sort of help me think about the greater than human and geological timescales and so forth. And I was marooned in the Arctic actually during the whole pandemic. So for 2 years, I got stuck in, I was on the way from Svalbard to Greenland when the borders closed. I got stuck in a lighthouse for 3 months, and then Australia really decided not to open again. So I actually had a front row seat for the last 2 years, and I just got back to Australia less than 2 months ago. So that was a very strange journey. And while I was stuck up there, at least Norway has fast internet in the Arctic. And I was just doing an image search for climate art, Arctic climate art. And I found A La Luz. And I really liked the curations of the simple beauty of the way it was presented, even though they were very complex ideas they were dealing with. And it wasn't overloaded with extraneous commentary. The works were allowed to stand on their own. And so I knew that David and Gonzaga, who I later found out were behind it, were respectful of the artist's work and their intentions. So from there I saw the call out, and I thought that's a great opportunity to exhibit when so many galleries are closed. And in the website, Points of Return, there are 2 threads of my work. One is the thermographic work with this strange device that allows us to see the world as heat, kind of I think of it as a non-human perspective, or greater than human perspective. And then there are my Anthropocenes, which is a series I've been making since I think about 2015 or so. Despite all the problematic elements of the term Anthropocene, I've put an S in it, so they're just scenes from this brave new geological era, and they're the other part of my contribution.
Amazing, thank you. I guess now, Evalie, you're the last one.
Hi, do you hear me? Yes. So I'm on the countryside in Austria, and my Wi-Fi is really bad. So sorry for that. But I hope you can hear me. So where to start? Thanks for having us and making this possible. And so my name is Evalie Wagner. I'm an artist and designer. I work across several disciplines. Mostly it's installation. Do you hear me? Because you look so... Okay. So it's mostly installations, paintings, photography, but my main material is botany. So it's about nature, plants, and their aesthetics. So that's why I call myself also an avant-gardener, and this was also title giving for the installation I submitted. It was sort of a giant walk-in herbarium at the Botanical Garden in Vienna, with the aim to create sort of a overview of the whole plant cosmos, because like in a nutshell, a botanical garden is like the overview of the world in a small format, and I wanted to make like another small format out of this, and so it's sort of an atlas of these plants. And it's addressed to, because of this variety of the plants, it's addressed to biodiversity, it's addressed to ecology. And when I saw the call, I just had the spontaneous feeling it's a match. So I was not really thinking about it. I was just submitting because I had the feeling it has the same idea behind it, to gap the bridge between nature and art in a very aesthetic way. So yeah, that's why I'm here.
Amazing, thank you. I'm struck by the sheer like diversity we have of perspectives and mediums, and Yeah, again, just so glad that we could all be here together today. And it's great to hear a little bit more about each of you individually as we sort of move forward towards the more conceptual part of our program today. So I guess with theme 1, we'll start now. So I kind of identified bridging geological and human timescales. And I thought that Miguel and Adam, perhaps you would have a good place to start with this conversation. But just to briefly introduce it, as we all know, climate change is happening on a geological scale, and it's something that is really difficult for human beings to conceptualize, right? And a lot of your work kind of brings that complexity down to something that we can like process, you know? So my questions for you guys and to the wider group would be, could you describe the importance of bridging these timescales? And yeah, this idea of nature as fixed and infinite is really present in the Western imaginary, and the fact that it's actually always changing and in flux and deteriorating. It's present with us in climate change, this era. So how does your work engage with these themes? I'll leave it up to you to decide who speaks.
Do you want to go, Adam, or should I?
No, after you. Please.
I think, well, I really just want to say one little detail about the introduction you said. So one of the really big problems actually is that climate change is not happening anymore at geological timescales. Like if we look at one of the biggest graphics that is documenting the Earth's climate past over the last million years, roughly 800,000 years, that NASA did from data that they extracted from ice cores. They very carefully studied the CO2 bubbles that are trapped within the ice cores, each of those layers of ice, and they reconstructed the CO2 structure of climate, right? And one of the things that has happened since the Industrial Revolution is that it has gone up like that, in a very different format that it has done over the last 800,000 years. So the natural variability of climate, what we would say the architecture of climate of the last million years is has totally changed in just 2-3 generations, right? But it's true that it's happening in delayed timescales that we perceive as fixed, and within Western perspectivism, we are very used to looking at things as passive, inert, inactive, right? Because Western philosophy, since the Enlightenment, and then also science, which was also modern science, Western science was born from that period, needs this distancing, right? It needs the distance between subject and object, between observer and object, between active and passive, right? And so there's this conceptual distancing between the human and the non-human in the world that creates this separation between what we consider inner and outer, what we consider to be part of our body and out of our body. And timescales is one of these perceptions we need to address, right? As much as materiality, because we are entangled in this fluctuating processes. We are part of the hydrosphere, we are part of the atmosphere, we are constantly exchanging matter with these bodies that are surround us and within us, and we don't really pay attention to those things, right? So I'm just going to speak for myself, but with my work, what I'm really trying to do, especially with my performances, has been to try to blur these boundaries between what we consider inner and outer, right? Between what we consider body and environment, between the processes that are happening in the environment and the processes that are undergoing change within our body. Because if we are capable of blurring out these boundaries between what we consider ourselves and what we consider everything else, then we are working within a more ecofeminist, more like horizontal ontology. We are thinking more ecologically and less egologically, right? This pyramid of hierarchy is broken when we think of the outer as the inner, as the world as an extension of our body. And of course, when we are talking about climate change, there's this problem of how we deal with data, right? That's why, and I'm just not gonna talk so much about this because Adam just mentioned the hyper object of climate change, right? And like one of the problems is the data, how it becomes uncommensurable, right? How we can't just like understand because it's so vast that it exceeds our perception. So yeah, trying to search for artistic procedures that can, record those different timescales and make it visually perceptible to us is very important, because then we are capable of distancing ourselves from the coldness of data, and we are situated in this grounding, moment of empathic response that engages both our rational self and our emotional self at once, right? That's the power of art, in my opinion. But yeah, please, Adam.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it really, dealing with other scales, be they geological or extremely small scales, decenters us, and it gets us away from this whole primacy of Homo sapiens, as epitomized by this horrible term, Anthropocene. And I think that sort of moves us towards putting us in our true place and scale, which is we're at the top of the food chain as humans, with a subsection of our species in the West causing more damage in the last 300 years than the last 300,000 years that humans have been around. But that's about it. As a scientist says in my thermographic work, one of the climate scientists says that, well, humans, she's a biological scientist, and she's trying to reconcile herself with everything that's going on and all these species she sees disappearing. And she just says, well, humans, we're at the top of the food chain. Humans can disappear and homeostasis will recover. So that's the way she deals with it, rather fatalistically. But I think the bridge between these scales that you're asking about, Abby, if one is possible, it needs to allow our hunter-gatherer brain, beyond its fight, flight, or freeze responses, to look beyond the horizon, beyond the next day or the next year. And one argument that's been made, of course, is that we're not cognitively endowed to cope with such a complex problem, because the cause is dislocated in time and space. This light bulb I switched on this morning to illuminate me somewhere, because of Australia, there's a coal-fired plant somewhere over there generating just a little bit harder, which produces a little bit more carbon dioxide, which sometime in the future might end up over Antarctica, which might cause the Thwaites Glacier to give it its final push, etc. So, these kind of time and space dislocations are very difficult for our brains to get around. And even film, it can be quite good at jumping from here and there, but it struggles temporarily. Communicating the future, we do it in I'm a filmmaker, documentary filmmaker by training. And, there's very clunky ways that we have to deal with jumping in time. We either use a transition, a dissolve, or an intertitle or something like that. And documentary is also hobbled by the fact that it's mostly about visible evidence. That's our core, our bread and butter. So what about the invisible processes that sort of are at the heart of climate change? So yeah, so I've moved to artistic strategies to show these imperceptible processes like sea level rise or glacial retreat. And so my work, Tideline, for example, this is the one with the drone shot of these amazing waves on a black volcanic beach in the Arctic. And it throws people the first time they see it because it's using reverse slow motion. And so the waves are sort of proleptic. They sort of appear before you see them. I don't know how to describe it, but yeah, that's one example. But I mean, I like thinking about the Umwelt, this existence and perception of other entities, rocks or ancient trees or insects with a lifespan that you measure in hours. It's kind of this radical empathy, I guess. And scientists are able to look at these different scales with their tools. And, you know, borrowing those as an artist is extremely attractive because it gives you a chance to examine different worlds beyond the visible. And so I guess I see my work mostly about as being making the imperceptible perceptible more than I'm dealing with scales as such. Yeah.
No, that's really wonderful. Thanks for sort of elucidating. And yeah, it is true, definitely, Miguel, that, yeah, geological timescales have accelerated to the point where we're able to see them. And I guess that is also kind of why we're here and discussing this in the first place, right?
Exactly, yeah.
But I
That's
like
what's causing the problem, right? It's going too fast.
Exactly. This idea of speed, which I think your work also plays with very well, Adam. So yeah, I'd like to open it up to the rest of you if you have any thoughts or connections with your own work or just reflections on what they've said.
I thought, I thought it was very interesting, Adam, that connection you made, that like using your background as a filmmaker as an example, and like how when making film we play with time, because my background is also film, so I understand what you said, like the transitions and like how that's reflected, you know, in the concept of your work as well, and like the subjects we're discussing here. Yeah, I just thought it was a very interesting point that actually I hadn't thought about until you mentioned it.
Yeah, and there's also one thing that Adam mentioned, which is that, you know, scientists are capable of measuring these timescales, you know, with like different apparatuses that can read those records that are both in like stone and in the seabed and in the cryologic, like in the ice, right? And when you're capable of reading these things and you like kind of connect them to the process that has undergone that piece of material, it kind of changes our perspective of that object, right? When we go to this landscape and then we suddenly understand, oh, it's been moving like that. Oh, this glacier carved it like this. Or, you know, when you understand how geology is working, you can appreciate how it's working right now in this very moment. And then things are not static anymore because you just understand that they're operating in eons, right? Like you will never see the difference, but it's happening and it's there. Yeah. And that change of perspective is like the most important, I think, because it changes our approach, it changes our relation, it changes our modes of thinking of that thing. And then it's capable of changing, yeah, the way we behave, the way we exist, and the way we relate to that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate this conversation about timescales and bringing them back into something that we can process via your art, via something that really evocative and present for people. Yeah.
Adam, before I forget, you mentioned something about like a scientist that made a comment on, or it's part of one of your works. You were saying something about the fact that humans have made more changes in the last 300 years than in the past thousands of years. And she made a comment, you said she made a comment about like if humans disappear. I didn't quite get the idea there. Could you?
Yeah, sorry. She's coming out as a biological scientist who looks at interrelationships in the biosphere, and she was saying that because we're top of the food chain, it really, if our disappearance would not have any cascading effects within.
Oh, right.
You know, we could disappear and the rest of nature would recover, because homeostasis, this sense of natural balance that the Earth maintains, would recover.
Yeah.
We would just stop doing things that were detrimental to the rest of the species.
Yeah.
It's a grim idea, but it helps. Just speaking to climate scientists, I was just totally struck by how despondent they'd become and how they consoled themselves by imagining the future, because we are just a brief blink in the Earth's history, you know. So.
I don't know if you guys saw for what day was it? May, no. Oh, I'm sorry, like my brain is not working today. For Earth Day, which now I can't remember the date precisely, but we projected on the website on the exhibition Tamara Garcia's work, which is called, it was a film called After the Fire, and like it shows all these different ages of the Earth, and I thought it really put in perspective how humans are just basically a very short episode in the planet's history, so I thought it was a very humbling seeing the film, like makes you realize, like, that we need less ego and basically work with nature. I mean, I just thought it was a very humbling piece. I don't know if you guys had the opportunity to see it.
I think that this discussion of, like this humbling sense is kind of a good pivot point to go towards our second theme, beyond science and technology, because this idea of creation, this sort of playing God in some respects, it tends to center what we need as humans and how we can most easily get it, and so this widening of perspective I think is relevant here. So like science and technology, they're sort of at the center of a lot of discussions about climate change. And the Industrial Revolution and everything sort of got us to this point in like a really circuitous path. And a lot of people remain convinced and convicted of the fact that we can sort of technologize our way out of the climate crisis. And I feel like a lot of the work in this exhibition sort of looks at, like, supplements science, sort of complements it or clarifies it or presents it in a different way that is necessary in order to address the sort of situation at hand. So I had a couple of questions that I was thinking maybe Felipe and Evalie would like to comment on, just based on your work, sort of having to do with science and what goes beyond it. So what kinds of things do we miss when we only look at the natural world from a scientific perspective, and how your work sort of brings attention back to those aspects. And then on the other hand, how do you view the tension between this like linear progress of technology and the circularity of like organic life? So I'll leave it there. Hopefully that gives a nice context for you to comment in terms of your work. So please.
Should I? How to start? I'm only talking about plants. Sorry. You can look at plants from different ways. You can look at from the side from a botanist, or from a medical side, or from a from my side is more like the eyes from a designer. So I look at them like different shapes and appearances and colors. And when I started to create this installation, it was all about to open other people's eyes for the nature they have in front of them. So it's mostly about to create sort of, to open the senses, to create sort of empathy. So because I think it's you need to be emotionally involved into something to care about something. That's just a very simple thing. And my aim is just to do something with the nature, and to make an artwork out of it, and to create something to so that other people so it's maybe open some eyes for somebody. So because you don't know the way how everybody's attracted by something else. So somebody needs some research data, somebody else needs some shapes and colors to be involved into something. So the installation was it was it's understood like a very open and transformative space, and it was also with sound, so it's like sort of a big universe, and it's illustrating the complexity of attempting to comprehend nature with the mind alone. So it's always about leaving a question and an answer in the same time, so leaving like a door open. So and also about this this like straightforward technology and about the organic cycles. So I grew up on a farm, and I still live on this farm. That's why I have this bad Wi-Fi. And when I was a children, we really totally lived these organic cycles. So it was about these seasonal cycles, these economical cycles. So you have like several animals, you have like your fields, your garden, and so I was really very trained to live in these cycles. And when I get older, it was the years of the big agri industry came into the EU, Austria, and so everybody was building huge stables, and you couldn't just breathe in it because it's just awful. And I think that because of why I experienced these things, I started to become an artist, because because I needed to do something else. And when I look at my evolution as an artist, it's very interesting, because I started with objects, with paintings, but it was in the end so awful, because I just don't want to create objects and put them somewhere. I also wanted to work in these cycles, and that's why I started to work with plants, because they are ephemeral, so I can use them, but in the end I can put them on compost, and they're in the cycle again. So this is sort of my view on these things.
Yeah, thank you, Felipe. You have a response?
I could, I mean, it's very light here. I could complement a bit, just stepping back in the importance of science in a general sense. But the scientific perspective is indeed very important, but it's not enough in many senses. I mean, at least not for my work, and from my perspective, it's not been enough at all for our current stage of struggle within the political disruptions and the environmental crisis. We are already realizing it. The scientific perspective is very much able to give us the dimension of the issue, but often if it fails to give us a clear response of how to avoid, or at least to fix the issues. Sometimes issues produced while formulating scientific solutions to another set of issues, which is very controversial. So besides that, the scientific perspective and the scientific methods, they often disconsider other relevant and important knowledge existing outside the scientific methodology and the scientific spheres. I think it's Jacques Rancière, a French philosopher, and he has an interesting approach about the topic of knowledge. Long story short, he goes like, there are 4 different types of knowledge. The things that we know, the things that we know that we don't know, the things that we don't know that we know, and also the things that we don't know that we already know. And I mentioned that in order for us to consider that the scientific perspective does not cover the vast amount of non-measurable aspects in the manifestation of reality. And also both to what regards the human perception and in the relationship between human and non-human entities as well. Besides that, science evolves within its own principles, methodologies, and timing. And if we consider the large amount of individuals and cultures that are not included in what we call modern or civilized society, won't relate differently from us to the world and to the relations of the cosmos. Sometimes those individuals and cultures they have been relating to the world successfully for much longer than we have been related to the world throughout scientific basis, and we cannot disconsider that kind of knowledge. And so the scientific perspective is very important, but it's not enough. And that's maybe one of the roles to be considered as an artist, at least in the way I do, because we kind of carry this diplomatic passport that allows us to transit freely, almost at least freely, among different fields of knowledge, be it scientific, spiritual, literature, fiction, legends, common sense, or whatever it is. I don't know if I should extend too much more, but at least my work addresses very much the possibility of art as a mechanism to awake new perspectives of knowledge. And I often establish interdisciplinary links between humanities and natural sciences, and in order to activate deeper discussions with this conflicting relationship among human and non-human within the so-called nature, let's say. The works that I have in this exhibition that was before displayed in Helsinki Art Museum, they are very much inspired in the thinking and the writing of this one Brazilian author called Ailton Krenak. He is a Brazilian indigenous leader, educator, writer, and environmental activist. And I very much based my concepts to develop the works for this exhibition in this one book called Ideas to Postpone the End of the World, which inspired the title, How to Postpone the End. The works of that exhibition, they materialize at the same time my own perspectives regarding environmental degradation. At the same time, it invites reflections from him, in the case, concerning these intrinsic relations between the environmental degradation, modern society, industrial activities, this increasing movement, and this long history of exploitation of the environment as a resource, which led to invasion of territories, the extermination of populations and cultures, and produced these still ongoing colonization processes around the world. In his book, Ailton Krenak, he approaches this topic, explaining, making it clear for us, Western civilized society, that what we produce is not only the marginalization of those cultures and individuals, but we entirely neglect and discredit their perspectives to what regards the relationship between human and non-human species, and that is not even smart from our side. We literally exterminate knowledge that would be imperative for us to recover, to encounter ourselves in our relationship with the cosmos somehow.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very much with you in terms of the importance of revalorizing these forms of knowledge that have been systematically discredited over time by purely scientific perspectives that seem to, they trade on colonial capital. So it's it's interesting how I've found that the work in this exhibition, it sort of speaks to this by opening up different, like emotional knowledges, sort of affective knowledges in terms of the climate crisis, which is so often understood only in terms of the scientific. So thank you to both of you for clarifying your relationship to that.
Yeah, I wanted to add in relation to what Felipe was saying at the beginning. There's this quote actually from Adam's statement in his work In the Heat of the Moment, where you say, scientists often assume that given enough of the right information, people will modify their behavior accordingly. However, climate change is proving that a response takes more than knowledge of the scientists' consensus. Psychology research suggests that an emotional connection is necessary. I mean, I just love that because I think it's just so true. Like, we don't need any more information. Well, we do need information, but clearly all the information that we have, all the data is not fostering a significant change. So that's why I think the work that you guys do, it's so important because it allows us to reestablish that connection, that emotional connection with nature and with the world. And I mean, just because now we were talking about Felipe's and Evalie's work right now, like Felipe's work, I felt like it's so beautiful and at the same time like hard to watch, like it triggers something in you. And then Evalie's work, like I love how simple it is. You know, you have basically a sheet with the leaves and that's pretty much it, but it shows like the diversity that the natural world provides, and like it's this beauty that makes you realize, oh, maybe we should care about this. I think that's the point of her work, at least to me. So yeah, I just wanted to add that basically.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say something, but I think I was thinking about one aspect that I think is very meaningful to mention, at least. Science it's a Western construct, right? But probably Evalie can speak about this. Most of the materia medica that the first colonial botanists brought back to Europe was actually indigenous knowledge. Like our knowledge, our scientific knowledge of plants and the natural world was built upon the knowledge of native people, native cultures. But what science did was that it extrapolated, it kind of like separated those things from the religious, from the spiritual, because these plants were sacred, because these plants were used in rituals, because they were seen in animist ways, right? They were active agents, and science used them as this like passive objects for exploitation. And actually many of the plants that came from South America fueled colonial expansion. Like, for example, the cinchona was used to treat malaria, and it actually made possible colonial expansion in the tropics. And I think there's another aspect when it comes to the linearity versus the circularity, which is that, you know, Western idea of progress is like, looks like this, right? it's like something you build on top of the previous things, but there's always like a going up, and there's this idea of linearity in progress. But even time in indigenous cosmologies is different, right? The past manifests in the future and in the present, you know, that the future is shaped by the past. So there's not this idea of linearity. I mean, this is, I maybe I just want to say that maybe we're looking at the theme from a very, you know, Western, you know, framework, but there's other ways to look at this topic as well.
Yeah, definitely. When you talked about animism, it came to my mind. I totally visualized what you wanted to illustrate with that comment, and I totally agree. It came to my mind one aspect of the work in the way I develop it, very much allowing my process to give voice to certain knowledge that I was not able to grasp, to incorporate before, and I allowed my process to incorporate this knowledge or within my possibilities, of course, even though I'm Brazilian, Western as well, even though I have a little bit more studies than most people about the indigenous culture, it doesn't even get close to allow me to have an entire comprehension of the cosmovision they have of the reality of the interconnection with the cosmos. But in the process I developed to produce the works for the exhibition, I kept on carrying on my regular sculpture-oriented processes, but at the same time, I allowed somehow to create stronger conceptual contrasts between ideas of degradation and development, and ancestrality and modernity. And in my work as a whole, it happens, included this one to this exhibition. I wanted to suggest this encounter between rudimentary technologies and knowledge, because I think it will be through that congregation of values and understandings and concepts and materialization of the cosmos throughout artistic practice, it would somehow help me to help others, or to allow others to create a portal, to create some kind of windows for others to sneak into this idea of somehow transit between scientific perspectives and this kind of more ancient and grounded cosmovision, in order maybe to mitigate this fearful, disturbed, and impersonal corporeity of this very virtual and absent context of the present. So I think somehow it is. And when he mentioned about animism, when Miguel mentioned about animism, it reminded me about Krenak, the author of this book. Some days ago, I saw one lecture of his, and he was explaining how it is complicated for him to explain to us that the river is his grandfather. And this is not a way to say it. This is how they relate to each other as a group, as a community. The river is the grandfather of all of them, regardless if they are son of the other or whatever. Forever, since generations, the river is their grandfather. And this entirely changes your perception of who you are, who are the others, and who are those that are non-humans, but you relate to them directly with the same kind of importance.
Absolutely. I'll take this opportunity to sort of pivot to our final theme, because I think it connects very well. This sort of problematization of the nature-human binary, and sort of, yeah, recognizing that we're in relation, like an active relation that with agency flows both ways with the natural world. And Ulrika and Tanja, like your work engages and becomes, like I would say, intimate with these sort of natural spaces or natural objects and entities, right? So I'd be really curious to hear your take on the conversation that we just had, in addition to sort of thinking about the way that your work kind of interrogates that binary and cultivates these sort of more reciprocal ecological relationships.
Should I start? First, I thought about something because I came across many years ago a stone in Darmstadt, and there was a society called the Society of the Sensitives. This was in the 17th century, and they were trying to get in contact with nature, and the way they did this was to express sensitive words to one another. So I think this strive for connecting back to nature is, of course, a constant struggle. And also we thought about, I mean, if we go into the more holistic or existential relation to climate change, I do think about Scranton and this like dying in the Anthropocene. Like, how do we accept the fact that we are here? And I mean, we want to be hopeful, but we also maybe have to accept the fact that we're going to die. And as you said in the beginning there, that once we're on the top of the food chain, you know, the rest of they will all recover once we're gone. So maybe that's something we also have to accept. But talking about the work ear to the ground and these field recordings, I also in some way see this scenery as a future, a possible future landscape for us. If we talk about time, and I mean Death Valley and the heat, and maybe, I mean, in this sense, I'm walking around and I'm trying to find something there in this dead land. And I mean, these people in Darmstadt with Goethe, they were trying to connect to nature by reading poetry, but in some, and now we're sort of left with this electronic device. I mean, we have a contact microphone and mobiles, and that's how we're trying to connect to nature. There's something sort of, okay, how do we do it, you know?
I guess I would say that I really appreciate that last image, Ulrika, of the sort of us with our technology, sort of like just trying like somehow like figure it out and like get back to some sort of existence where we really had a real meaningful relationship with our surroundings and with the other living things. I think for the past few years, have just avoided the word nature altogether because it's so like problematic and it's so broad. A little while ago, I looked into the sort of the etymology of nature, and it's meant a vast amount of like different things. It's meant sort of like the core of what is, it's meant sort of life processes. And I think even now, it's really hard. I don't think it's even like used in most scientific papers because of how broad and undefinable its meaning is. But I do think our current understanding of it, or the most dominant understanding, like stems from a sort of like monotheistic, like Christian history where God, like this monotheistic God, has like created nature as like a resource for humans, and humans are separate in that they are like created from the image of God. And, you know, in the Bible that we have dominion over it, and all living things are our resources to use in order to benefit ourselves and the perpetuation of humanity and God's image. And that, you know, sort of spelled the beginning of the ecological crisis, that we feel like we have this permission to do with like living things and minerals as we wish. And so it feels hard to use that word when I know what the source of it is, and that it is in some ways, it has like created the foundation for our current ecological crisis. And I think I also don't use it because it is kind of meaningless to me. And I think it also allows for a very like a sort of shorthand. I think it prevents us from looking closely and becoming intimate in a much deeper way with the species that we live with and the habitats around us. And I think that is what I strive for in my work, is to set up a sort of either like interactive situations or images that show you things that you've seen before, but sort of make them sort of beautiful but strange and take you a little bit closer so that you spend a little bit more time, and something that is initially beautiful and maybe draws you in, you realize there's something a little bit off, and that is usually like a background story of some sort of disturbance that we've caused to our environment. And I also like recognize the awkwardness of that, like Ulrika was talking about, and for all the time that I actually spend with my subjects, it is like nothing compared to the knowledge that, like Felipe was talking about, Indigenous cultures have had. But it's an effort, and I think that like evidence of that effort is important. And I think there is also, I think it was Ulrika who said that there's like some level where I'm trying to accept the stage at which we're at, the level of like environmental disturbance at which we're at, and how to like move on from there, like see it with very, very clear eyes. And it seems like, just like we build good relationships with people, like we need to learn how to listen. We need to learn how to witness. We need to learn how to be humble. We need to not like make assumptions based on stereotypes. And yeah, I think it's, maybe I'm answering like that second question that you listed in the sheet, but for me, that's the path. If we want to have a closer intimacy and better understand and be able to share this planet in some sustainable fashion.
It's what Felipe said about this knowledge and what we know that we don't know that we know. It's a bit like this, you know, with our relation with we talk about nature is a bit, but maybe we just have to listen or be more sensitive, or you know, also.
And it is,
but I mean, we also
go ahead.
Again. No, I also thought about this. Talk about our Western perspective, and it is problematic because we can't. We are in this. We're so much a fruit of our culture. I mean, where your culture is what creating your whole belief system, and it's very difficult to step out of this. And you can. I did a project about. I did a comparison between Sweden, which is the most secular country in the world, and India, and then you found out that the fear of death was twice as big amongst people in Sweden compared to India. And I mean, that's something that we can't, because we live in a secular country, so we don't have a belief in after. I mean, in some sense, we are our culture, and it's hard to change our consumer patterns, and I mean, it's hard to change our beliefs, I would say. I mean, I would call them beliefs, how we sort of live our lives.
Yeah, I was just, you said something that made me remember that I also think a lot about sort of the emotional component that Yeah, maybe it was Gonzaga. You were quoting something in Adam's
I was
statement.
quoting Adam, yeah.
Yeah.
About the emotional connection.
And I think a lot about that in a very sort of utilitarian way, that like, yes. So I used to work in marine and coastal management, and I saw sort of firsthand about like why people decide to do one thing, like manage the environment one way or another. And a lot of it had to do with their like personal, like physical experience with the space or with the species. And that is what creates a sort of emotional, like physical connection. And yeah, it's been shown across the board that is what actually creates behavior change. And I think I'm sort of unashamedly like trying to create emotional responses through my work. Yeah.
Well, at least I can speak for myself. You definitely succeed. And I love that our conversations kind of just like evolved into like a takedown of Western epistemology. That's where I want all of my conversations to go. So it's been wonderful. Yeah, we have like a few minutes left. I'd love to hear anybody has sort of general comments on what we've discussed today. We've heard really powerful testimonies and descriptions of artistic engagement. And I'd just, if you have any final thoughts, that would be wonderful before I end with sort of the final question, which is, spoiler alert, how to and to what extent can art serve a political function, which I believe we've hit on in various capacities today, but perhaps just as a closing note, just a thought that we could leave with.
I mean, art is always political. I think that's my standing point. It's I mean, now I think art can, I mean, now I'm going to talk out from my own work, but I can say people that if you listen to Stones, and then at least I can open a gate, or I can say, okay, listen, this looks dead, but it's not dead. It's actually, it also has a vibration like everything else. I mean, now I'm just talking out of my own perspective. But so in that sense, I think it can influence other people, and I think people can say, oh, you know, it was such an eye opener. I didn't know Stones could speak. Not too.
This is reminding me there's this book that you might have read called Art in the Anthropocene, right? It was out like some years ago. And I remember, and I mean, I read it years ago, so I don't really remember exactly with the words, but I remember in the introduction, they were talking about human disruption to the environment. And I think they were specifically talking about the atomic bombs, and like how these critics walked into an art gallery, and they were like very angry at the pictures of I think it was Robert Adams taking photographs of stones, right? And they were like, the world is falling apart, and like people like Robert Adams are taking pictures of stones, right? And they were actually, and the book kind of points to this idea that, you know, in this moment of like nuclear war, they were taking photographs of what would be the geological record of the Anthropocene, right? The aftermath of huge violence and destruction is going to be like just rocks, right? And also you know, all the radioactive record that is going to be recorded there. No? I don't know, this just reminded me to that. I wanted to share it. And I really loved what like all the stuff that Tanja shared. I made me also remind there's this tribe in the Amazon who they have no word for nature. And they say like, we have no word for nature because we are nature, right? And yeah, nature is this like Western construct. It's a way of looking at the outside and not, is that scientific distancing, right? Like we are here and that's there.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm glad, Tanja, you brought that up, because it's something I often think about, like how, and I probably make that mistake to like talk about nature like as this other thing, is like nature and us, and I think that's actually part of the problem, basically, that we're facing. And getting rid of that concept, I think, would really help us.
I guess I would just say that I don't think there's anything like maybe inherently wrong with nature. It's just that it really needs to be defined each time that it's used. I think it's certainly a useful word in terms of, because there is a popular understanding of it, that there is a way that one can leverage it to enact like certain laws or like conservation efforts. And it has a sort of, it's a useful like tool because of how we popularly understand it, even though that history is like problematic. But I think I just like skip over the problem by not using it myself or being really, really careful about it.
But isn't the problem with nature, it's such an individual idea? I mean, if I say nature, you will all picture something completely different.
Really?
You can never agree on it.
I think if we say nature, everybody's gonna think about something green, right? But nobody thinks about the desert. Rarely. But yeah.
There's a good article if you guys are interested. It's ironically in Nature magazine. I can't remember, but if you look up like definition of nature or something like that, I think it was published maybe 2 years ago. It's a really interesting breakdown of all the things that we think about when we think of nature, and broken down within the different disciplines of like evolutionary biology or like ecologists or environmentalists. It's a sort of fascinating breakdown of it.
Maybe I could comment. There's if I'm not interrupting anyone, I'm sorry if I am. There was during part of my studies of object-oriented ontology, I hit into this comment about how the Romanticism mistranslated the very concept of nature from somehow inherited knowledge, again, that was being pinched from different sources, and they didn't really have any kind of methodology to translate what they wanted to mean with human nature. So they started to use the terminology human nature as something that is for granted, immutable, and they started to describe it in the natural environment. So this is somehow one of the ways that we inherited this understanding of nature as something that is already given, that is not going to be changed regardless what you do, because it's something that is natural, it's inherent from existence itself. And this is very well, maybe not very well, it could be a better approach, but for the kind of book, it was okay. There is this book called The Invention of Nature from Andrea Wolf, if I'm not wrong. And she describes the journeys of Alexander von Humboldt throughout South America. And she gives this very enlarged parameter of the Romanticism and the poetry, very artistically and very philosophically as well scientific, and the congregation of the two fields, and at some point how at the same time they create some kind of complementarity, but they are very controversial in the agreements they have in the end. So I don't know. I think it's an interesting comment. It's an interesting perspective about the idea of nature, how we in the Western world, we got this idea, how we got this concept, and we use it freely, and we don't really know how much it is, what it really means, how much it really means, how important it is for us to have it a little bit more sharp, let's say, or polished.
I have something else from the plant world. There is a phenomenon called plant blindness, and it was invented. So this word was invented by two psychologists in the 80s, and it's about that most of the people don't see. So if they see a picture of, I don't know, a forest or a chair and a tree, they just say, okay, there is something green. And maybe they say it's bushes or trees, but they don't know the names. They don't know the plants. They don't know, they don't know the plants. They don't say like it's, sorry, I don't know the name in English, but they don't say it's this or this or this, because I think because we lost the connection. And, you know, if you give something a name, you have like this emotion to it. So I don't know, it can be your own name, it can be just the name you learn, but I think it's just because we don't really learn much about nature anymore. Sorry, I say it again. I hope you understand what I wanted to say. So it's so strange, we get like sort of, it's just a vague and opaque nature, and it's because we don't have a name for all the things. Maybe it was too complicated.
No, not at all. I think that really ties in well, like sort of the way in which in so much of Western society, there's like a severance. But I think all of you have contributed to sort of mending that with your work in this exhibition, and I think that Points of Return really does have a lot to offer in terms of the themes that we've discussed today. And I know we've gone over a bit, and I want to be respectful of all of your time as well. I'm really grateful for you all taking the time to chat today and engage in such an interesting conversation. Really getting at kind of the core of what we're talking about in the climate crisis, which is something that's very internal. It's a relation. So thank you all so much. Gonzaga, maybe you have some final words.
No, thank you for all, the ideas you have shared here in this hour and a half. And it's been great to, well, first of all, meet you in person and hear from your own words about your own work. And, it's been great. And I feel like David and I are really grateful to you all for participating, like truly, and where it's an honor for us to showcase your work and like disseminate it as much as we can. And like Points of Return is an online exhibition, but we're really trying to keep it alive with things like this one. And in the future, hopefully we'll be able to do more things like this or in other formats. Just because we believe in what you do, we think that it's really important that you guys, basically give something to the world that is needed. That's all I have to say. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the platform.